Hello, welcome to First Friday at the Fab Lab for June. We're really excited to have to be broadcasting from AMRoC today, and we've got with us Dhalia Bumbaca with WellFed Community, and she's got Savannah Bennett with her, and she'll be making introductions. And we're really excited that she's here. We have a couple of us who are hanging out at AMRoC that will be asking questions, and we welcome your questions as well from Facebook Live and from YouTube. And we look forward to a great evening. So without further ado, here's Dhalia.
Thank you, Terry. Hello, everyone. So as I was introduced, my name is Dhalia Bumbaca, and I'm actually a graduate of the University of South Florida, where I studied business. However, through being involved in the university area and the Tampa Bay area, I became very invested in sustainability. And to me, that was rooted in some early beginnings with family. And so my grandmother is an Italian immigrant. And when I was growing up, she really emphasized working in her garden and even the importance of organic food. And so whether that be the herbs that she used to make different teas or different concoctions in my little kid brain, or it be the heartier meals that were full of nutrition and fueled my mind and body, I got a very good early education about the importance of food and how to better incorporate it in my diet. And so from there, I inadvertently learned about nutrition and the best ingredients to cook to be healthier and to really feel energized. And that has translated today into what we do at WellFed Community, or at least that's my story and my what WellFed means to me. But it was founded with a team of individuals that all come from different backgrounds and different interest areas. And so Savannah Bennett, who's here on the call with me, is one of the fantastic people who helped start this organization. Savannah, do you want to take a second to introduce yourself?
Sure. So as Dhalia said, my name is Savannah Bennett. I'm also a graduate of the University of South Florida. I did a master's in food sustainability. Well, the master's is in global sustainability, but my focus was on food sustainability. And it's just something that I have come to learn is that not everyone has the same access to food. And that's something that I really want to change, just because I feel like having healthy food options and knowing how to prepare healthy foods really sets you up for success. So that's just something that's really important to me, and sustainability obviously is also important to me, and just how we can be in control of our own health. So that's just how I got into sustainability. And really it started when I was a really little kid, actually. I remember in fourth grade we were learning about recycling and stuff, and I was like, well, don't supermarkets throw away their bananas that turn brown? Why don't we do a project where we go collect all the brown bananas and make banana bread? And that actually, we ended up doing that, and it was really cool. And that was just kind of my first glimpse into food waste and how food is really, it's unfortunate that we have so much food and there are so many people who are hungry. Yeah.
Wow, what a beautiful story. I didn't actually even know that, Savannah. So thanks for sharing. But that's exactly what WellFed tries to capture. And so it was birthed from COVID, really, and recognizing that the people that were most disenfranchised by COVID were just further outcasted during the whole pandemic, because there was this fear of interacting with people, right, that we all shared, of not understanding the virus in its fullest. And so the best option was to stay inside. But as months and months went by, we really felt that these people still needed to be addressed, and this problem still needed to be addressed. And so using the proper CDC guidelines and wearing masks and gloves and creating socially distant activities, we were able to go into the community with a food pantry, actually at first, that tries to divert some of that food waste from grocery stores in the area and bring them to people that need them. But an issue that we found, or that was identified to us, was that there's all this food at the food pantry, but people would come in and reject certain ingredients or certain items because they didn't know what to do with them. So what a terrible story that someone comes in looking for food and then leaves food behind because they don't have the education or the food education to really know how to use that ingredient, right? And a lot of that's cultural. And I think at least for me, if it wasn't for my grandmother being Italian and all the traditional recipes she had and connection to the land from living in the mountains of Italy, I wouldn't have had that education, right? So in the same way that it was taught to me, it sounds like to Savannah, it was taught as well through this recycling curriculum. And really that's what WellFed aims to do, is educate around food systems and food in order to make it a more accessible option for people. And so when you have access to a food pantry, you can then utilize everything in that food pantry. Or when you're involved with a community garden, you can know what to do with the squash or the zucchini or the eggplant or mangoes that are growing from that garden. I also saw Richa that just joined the call. Richa's another one of our founders. Richa, did you want to take a second to introduce yourself?
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, great. So my name is Richa. I am a third-year medical student at the University of South Florida. And like Dhalia mentioned, I'm one of the founders of WellFed Community. And as someone with a health background, my main focus is really to push the health aspect of WellFed Community, especially when it comes to nutrition. I really believe that, and I'm sure Dhalia also touched on it, I really believe that all of these things, like the nutrition, the health, the sustainability aspect that WellFed brings, is important and something we should be supporting more in the future. So I'm very glad and happy to be part of this team.
Thank you, Richa. I appreciate it. And yeah, Richa had another really important pillar of what we try to do is educate around that nutritional aspect. So people might go to the doctor and hear that they have high cholesterol, or, you know, they're at risk for diabetes, or they might be on their way to obesity, right? But what does that mean and how do they solve that? And so when we bring in an ingredient that, you know, helps with digestion, and they know that they have gas, right? So it's like, this can help solve that issue. And those are the big takeaways for people that actually encourage them to try the food. And then once they try it, our goal is that it tastes good. So then hopefully you keep eating it. And from there, you create healthier habits. So that is, in a nutshell, the three pillars, I would say. Sustainability being one of them, health and wellness being the second, and then the third, education, which is really the vehicle to which we hope to create change. Some examples of our programming right now I could jump into. And right now we currently operate out of the Kinship Free Market, which is on waters in the university area. And here we do Nutritional Grab and Go. So this was the first program we started, and it was the most COVID friendly. We were ensuring that we didn't have a crazy amount of contact with the individuals. The food was prepared in advance so that we were making sure that we were able to follow all food safety guidelines. But with that, it was a simple grab and go that individuals were able to try a recipe on their own time, but also get that recipe with that food item so that they can make it on their own. And a key component of that demo was that all the ingredients in the product were found in the pantry. So we're not going to introduce something that you have to go to Whole Foods or, you know, an obscure market to get. It's all something that's accessible to you. From there, we partnered with the University Area Community Development Center to work within their community garden. And our first program with the UACDC was it addressed the entire family unit, but was primarily adults or like young families coming during the day. And what we did there is utilize the ingredients in the garden and complement that with what would be found in a regular food pantry. And so again, create a recipe that was accessible. And that allowed even more flexibility because depending on what was grown in the garden, you could actually use a really elevated ingredient. For example, Swiss chard. You can't necessarily find Swiss chard at Winn-Dixie, but if it grows in a community garden, now you can incorporate that into your diet. Right? And that's a perfect example of an ingredient that some people saw as a barrier to use because you might not know what to do with that off the bat. But when introduced, it's very similar to spinach. It's kind of like cabbage, right? It becomes a lot more manageable. And so now we operate two programs out of the UACDC Community Garden, the second being for youth. And that youth program is geared towards children aged 8 to about 15. And that's really hands-on. We have the students cooking in the garden, making simple recipes with no heat for the most part, so that they have a toolkit to feed themselves in a healthy fashion. And through that, we also incorporate some elements of sustainability as well, with composting and, of course, being in the garden, gardening. So understanding that full cycle. Do either of you want to add anything to that?
Sure, yeah. I think Dahlia mentioned some really important things, and really what we're trying to do with teaching these kids about food, and also the families that we're teaching to, is we want to empower them to be able to take their health into their own hands, because like she mentioned earlier, our health is so intimately tied to everything that we eat. All the chronic illnesses that we develop as we age, part of them are due to the things that the habits that we develop as kids. So we're really hoping that by empowering families and kids, we can ensure that they are on the track to be healthier adults, hopefully.
Yeah, and Richard made a really good point there. She said it was about building habits. And so I think oftentimes we don't recognize how ingrained certain habits are within us, and that creates a disconnect with food. Right now we live in a culture of fast food, right? It's quick, it's easy, it's around every corner. And even things that maybe initially started off with a more healthy kind of approach to fast food, like Chipotle, great example, right? When Chipotle first came out, you didn't feel so bad eating it. But then as it progresses and becomes a bigger and bigger I don't know if it's a franchise, but franchise, then you start to lose that nutritional value because you want to create more profit and so on and so forth. Whereas a big movement started from Italy actually was the slow food movement. And that was about regaining the traditional culture towards food, which is, putting love into it, taking the time to make a tomato sauce at home. It might take a few minutes longer than running out to the store, but not only are you getting more nutritional value from that dish that you're cooking yourself, where your food comes from, what is in it exactly, and you're oftentimes spending a lot less money on it. So the difference between, there's a cost benefit analysis of your time and effort, the price to and the nutritional benefit. Those are all factors that should go into that equation. Whereas I think that's been removed. A lot of those factors have been diluted to easy, quick, and cheap in that moment, which might not be cheap over to the long term, right? Like, I could ask you guys a question. Do you guys bring your lunch to work?
Yes, I do. Every day.
Me too.
Perfect. And that's a perfect example of things that you can do that will affect your bottom line, your personal budget expenses. Because yesterday, I don't have any food in my fridge because I haven't gone grocery shopping, and I spent $25 on breakfast and lunch. And that's ridiculous if I spent $25 every day on like a coffee, a breakfast sandwich, and then my lunch. So think about how that adds up to $100 in a 4-day work week versus a $100 grocery bill.
Yeah, I very rarely spend $100 at the grocery store, but I'm only shopping for myself. So, but I think on that note, though, there's also the convenience, and that's the problem for a lot of people, is they need something convenient because they're working 50, 60 hours a week, maybe more. And I also think that we try to do a good job of integrating things that are quick and easy, especially with things that you don't need to cook with heat. And I think that's a great way to do that. And especially since I've been doing a lot of the grab and go events, that one time we did the raw sweet potato as like a salad type of thing instead of how you would normally cook a sweet potato. And cooking a sweet potato takes a good hour if you have just throw the potato in the oven. But if you want to eat it raw, a lot of people don't know that you can eat it raw. So just sharing that information opens like a whole new avenue for someone to get nutrients in a way that they didn't even know that they could before. So I feel like we try to do like a combination of convenience as well as like health, but we still try to mix it up. It's important. You can also take your time.
Yeah, no, great example, Savannah. That's the perfect example. And that was actually a recipe that we discovered in doing WellFed. That's not something that we were aware of prior to starting this organization. But then as we got into our community and understood the needs of it, for example, at the kinship some of the clientele that comes through might not have a kitchen at their disposal. And that was brought to us by the gentleman who runs the food pantry, who thinks sweet potato blew his mind. So glad to hear it. So when we had that recipe out there, the gentleman that always comes by, he's a regular, was super excited. Similarly, we did a roasted red pepper, and we made the comment that I've done it over a campfire grill before. And he was like, well, I could do it over a fire. And I was like, absolutely. Right. So, yeah, a perfect example of how it's a lot more accessible than people think sometimes to have really healthy meals. And I'm going to emphasize over and over again, affordable, because it's people, I think, are under the impression that, you have to fruits and veggies and being organic is expensive. There's farmers, especially in Florida with such a long growing season, there's farmers markets that are open 9 to 7 days a week. Savannah, do you know what I'm about to say?
Yeah, I was laughing at the 24/7.
But yeah, Bears Grove. Yeah, but Bears Grove, just 15 minutes from the university area, if that's like conservatively, they grow leafy greens on site. They have their chickens on site. And like I said, it's open 9 to 7. So that's a more flexible time frame that people can access it. I went to Misty's around the corner. I got like 10 tomatoes for $1.
Wow.
Yeah, new find. I'll have to tell you guys about it. But there's a lot of more affordable ways to get better nutrition. And some things are even simple switches, like a can of beans versus bagged dry beans. And it's just about exploring those options or coming out to one of our programs that are all open to the public, especially at the community garden. It's a beautiful day, or now it's kind of getting hot, so I'm not going to lie to people, but normally the September through May, it's a beautiful morning where you can work in the garden, you can take the produce. The Wild Kinship is out there distributing food. And of course, we're there to provide some educational takeaways surrounding food. And to Gabriel Morgan's comment, we'd love to. I don't know if I can leave my contact info.
You can, whatever you like.
Okay.
You can actually type it in there if you want, where it says all.
Okay.
But this is great from our perspective. I could try throwing myself into this stream. I've never done this before, so I could do this and say hello from the other side of the room. And I don't know. Can you all hear me? Okay. I've got my mic off on my computer so we don't get echo. So I want to make sure that the other one's picking up. But the questions, I think it's all amazing because we do a lot of tech stuff in this space, right? Mm-hmm. But the idea is to educate people and give them the tools for being able to master tech and not be mastered by it. But another part of that is while you're mastering tech and understanding that it is a huge important part of your life, that you not lose touch with the more essential parts of your life, which are food, right? The environment, using the technology we have in an ethical way so that we can make the world better and not worse and not more complicated than it has to be. And so I think, doing the things we're trying to do here with WellFed Community and other groups about like the idea of doing this vertical wall garden we want to do here, to bring the outdoors in to a tech space like this, where kids and adults can have, I love greenery. I love being outdoors. Being inside at the mall is challenging. But being able to bring some of that inside and not let people forget what the essentials are, is immensely important. And then going back to your we can't tell people that you have to eat healthy and here's the ways you can do it without providing some demonstration space for that.
Yeah, and especially when you're growing things on your own, if it's free. I mean, it takes your labor, but oftentimes you're talking about what a seed would cost, which is pennies to the dollar when you can consider the harvest that you'll get from that, right? And then if you get into drying seeds and harvesting those, it only gets even. You couldn't even put a dollar amount to what it costs to put a meal together. And on my way over here, I was actually talking to my sister, and she brought up the fact that my grandmother always tells a story of, she didn't live through the Great Depression, but she calls it the Depression. It was World War II, post World War II. And food, like being able to grow their own food is what kept their family alive. A family of 10 plus 2 parents in the mountains of Italy with very little access to stuff, being able to have their own bees or grow goats and have their own gardens is really what differentiated their family from those in the village, let's say, who didn't have all that land or space. And I think that's part of why I was so like my grandmother's always preparing for World War II, in the sense that she wants to make sure that, you know, her pantry's stocked and that all her things are jarred. And with the growing season back home being only 3 months, you only have so long to really prepare for that. But she did. And we have tomato sauce through the year from her 1-acre garden that she, as an 80-year-old woman, she managed it up until I think 83. They moved out of that home. So if she can do it.
No, continue. Sorry.
No, that was it. If she could do it, so can we.
I absolutely love that story. And I feel like it kind of highlights just how important it is to stay in touch with the ground and growing your own food, like we've been talking about. And I feel like it's also more satisfying that way, because I know when I eat stuff from my garden, I'm more motivated to finish what I'm making and I feel more satisfaction out of it. So I also think, like, kind of on a side note, it's good for picky eaters. So kids who might not necessarily be into vegetables, if they've grown the vegetable, if they've seen it go from a seed to a plant, then they might feel more invested and be able to understand why it's important for them to eat. And then also having that component of, like, you know, like my grandmother or like my mother did this with me or taught me how to do this. It kind of helps them connect more to their culture and their family. So yeah, I love that story a lot.
Thanks, Risha. And you bring up the big point that food is through food you can build relationships, right? And that's super important. And I think that's what is echoed in all of our stories, and what we hope to do here at the Fab Lab too, is build relationship through this hydroponic wall, through educating people, and in all the communities we work in, but through this education and being in these communities is build those relationships and create somebody else's story to be tied to it all. So if somebody walks away from the Tampa Bay area and moves somewhere else and is like, oh, well, I understand this. I eat healthy because I was introduced to this at a young age. And so it's become ingrained in me. And then they can champion that elsewhere. Right. So it's about that dissemination of information.
And I'll jump back in on that, because I think that's critically important, right?
Yeah.
That how many kids today, especially in an urban environment, get that experience. We don't have maybe the yard garden, backyard garden, or you live in an apartment, you don't have those things. And so being able to have these things in these public spaces where you see it and you have some perspective and some experience. I was, spent a lot of time growing up with elderly people as well, and I was exposed to that in New Jersey, right? The gardens, and my aunt had produce market and all that stuff. So that was part of the fabric of my childhood. And a lot of kids are fortunate to have that. So if we can create those environments somewhere else, I think that'd be fantastic. In places where they often go. Great to see them in schools, right? So that's why school gardens and things. So I think that's fantastic.
No, absolutely. And it's great to see them indoors too, right? I think that's like a new concept.
People, I don't know if you can see behind me, that's where the garden's going to go, right? It's a slat wall in an old in a sportswear store. And it does lend itself well to putting things up there. So we've also got Christian Leon with us. I'm going to move the camera over to him.
Forced on camera.
There he is. He's over there. There he is. And he's with the cell, and he can tell you a little bit about that. But did you have anything you wanted to add in there, Christian, or did you have any thoughts?
I just think it's important to build community also by people relating over something that is central to everyone's lives, which is food. And I think that it's a common point. It's something that in any community, I think, coming from Toronto and coming from different places in the history of Tampa, there's a lot of sharing between cultures, and there's a lot of things that really come from that. There's a lot of unique parts of our identity, even in Tampa. When you think of Tampa and you think what's the menu of Tampa, the traditional menu, and the first thing you think of is a Cuban sandwich.
Yeah.
It's like the first thing that comes to mind, and you think about other things, and it tells you the history of the place. So having a really diverse and incredible community like Uptown, being able to pull people in and have people come together over food and talk about how it's prepared and talk about what they can do together, who knows kind of what that will bring of it. But it's a great community builder. So I think it's a great project for many reasons.
And Christian, you made a really good point of it being a great community builder. And that's really where the community comes from in WellFed Community. It's, yes, we're focused on feeding people and we're feeding people well and healthy ways, but more importantly, we're about building community. So it's not our organization here, it's the Tampa Bay area's organization, right? It's all these different players. When we're out at our garden, for example, Stella, one of our volunteers at the garden, she runs a pharmacy down the street, and she's a fantastic addition to the team. She has a wealth of knowledge. She knows that community much better than us, having lived in it her whole life. And she just has a passionate soul to help people. And we've welcomed her onto the team. Same thing with any of our volunteers. If they show interest to joining us in that way, we really want to capitalize on the recipes of everybody's individual families and kind of bring those to light, because especially when we talk about like the refugee community in the Tampa Bay area, they're rich in knowledge and in food. They just don't necessarily know how to access it in the same ways that somebody who lived here their whole time is, or they need somebody to help uplift them to showcase that to other people. And so that's what we want to be as well, right? If there's a recipe that we hear about in our conversations with the community, we want to then bring that to the table and showcase it for all its richness and glory.
And kind of on that note, I feel like it's so special that I think we as a team, WellFed, all of our board members, but also all of our volunteers like Stella, like we all have very different backgrounds. And I think having those different backgrounds, but being united around the same concept of food community has made for a better experience, hopefully, for everyone that we're serving, because we have our unique funds of knowledge, but then we're able to put them together and see things differently, that all combine together to create this really interesting programming, I feel like. So yeah, it's really cool to be able to unite around food like this.
No, great point. We do all have super different backgrounds, which I think is important to touch on a little bit, because I think that creates how organically it came to be. So, my grandparents are Italian, but I was raised in Canada, where it was full of immigrants. So, best friends Filipino, other friends Egyptian. So just like so much different cultures. I can't take credit for all of them, but I do I do hold claim to Italian. And then I'll let you both introduce yourself or your background. I think Richa, are you frozen?
I'm not frozen. Okay. So my background, I grew up here in Tampa, actually. So I went to King High School. I went to USF for undergrad. I'm going here now for med school. So I've lived here my whole life, but my parents are originally from India. So we're from a very small ethnic group in the Himalayas. So we have kind of a unique set of foods and customs that we use. And my grandparents were all subsistence farmers. So that's kind of why like gardening is really big in my household. And we have like so many squash growing in our garden right now. But that's my background. And so that's kind of how initially I was introduced to food. And then later on, I kind of like, I was big on science fair projects. So I did science fair projects around like herbs and vegetables and fruits and like the benefits of antioxidants. And so as I kind of grew into discovering that being a physician was the right path for me, I started seeking out more of these opportunities, and I started doing nutrition lessons, and then the rest is history. So yeah, it's really awesome that we kind of have found each other through these different paths, but through the shared passion, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'll speak a little bit to Chris, who couldn't join us today, but Chris was born and raised in Brazil. She moved to the US in her maybe mid 30s. So around then, but she later on in life, and she's been here ever since. And prior to that, she did a lot of work with actually reintroducing organic farming into Brazilian communities, because there was a big use of pesticides and herbicides. And so trying to move away from that was difficult, because there's a lot of financial incentive or people perceive there to be a lot of financial incentive to using those pesticides, because it keeps pests away, so you yield bigger crops, is the assumption. However, you're not getting the same quality of food, and really with organic farming, you can still arrive at those same yields. It just requires a little bit of traditional knowledge that had been lost over generations. And so Chris is a fantastic addition to our team. She still currently works in sustainability in the Tampa Bay area and has lived here for the past 18 years, around there. And then Lee is another member of our team, and Lee was born and raised in China and came over to USF for his studies, graduate studies. Yes. And he currently works in hydroponics almost exclusively. So another fantastic wealth of knowledge for us. And then Savannah might be having some trouble.
I think she's having some trouble.
So I could introduce her a bit, but Savannah got her master's from the Patel College of Global Sustainability, and she currently works for the city of Clearwater in recycling. But she is our true-bred American, and that doesn't mean she doesn't bring her own. She's actually vegan, and so she brings a totally different perspective as well to the team, and really helps us like commit to our mission. And I think that's a really good point too, is that I'm actually not, like, I think people always assume that we're all vegan, and I'm actually not vegan. Richa, I believe you're vegetarian, right?
I'm not even vegetarian.
Oh, okay. But I think that's really important to be transparent about, because I think a lot of times people think that because we're here doing this work, we must be vegan. And then that's this impossible standard to reach, right? If you aren't familiar with how to do that. But we're not. I try to make 80% of my plate veggie, and I do stay away from like red meats. I was trying to stay with fish, but then I watched Seaspiracy, which if anyone hasn't seen, I recommend.
I still haven't seen it, but I've heard so much.
Yeah, I recommend it because it sheds a lot of light on things, but that's a different story. But really, to say that all is just to say that there's a learning curve to eating differently, or to changing your eating habits, and that's okay. And for example, a couple months ago, I decided to go vegetarian and see if I could do it and do it full. And I did it for, I did it for the time period that I committed to. And then I slowly reintroduced things like chicken and stuff like that. But I'm constantly in flux like that, because I have to do what works with my lifestyle. And if I, come home from work with leftover chicken, I'm going to eat it, because then it's food waste otherwise. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to go buy as much of it as I used to, right? So it's your own personal journey. It's a learning process. It takes a lot more planning sometimes, which I think is what people get afraid about. And if Savannah, if your connection's working, do you want to talk a little bit to being vegan and what that is for you? Oh, I think she's frozen.
I think she just broke. Oh wait, just
Technology.
Sure. Maybe I can chat her.
I guess in the meantime,
Can you hear me okay?
totally, yes, you can. I'll let you talk.
Yeah.
Tech issues.
No, that's okay. We'll see if she gets better. So,
Okay.
Richard, did you want to continue?
Yeah, I just wanted to circle back to what you were saying. So although we like to focus a lot of our meals on, plants, beans, grains, and we like to say that we're plant-based, we're not trying to exclude people who don't eat plant-based foods. Really, our goal is just to highlight the power of plants and veggies and grains, because I think those are often underappreciated, because they're so versatile and they can be made in so many different ways. And kind of like what Savannah and Dhalia touched on earlier, people aren't often aware of the different ways you can prepare these foods. And so although on the surface, I think sometimes they get a sort of bad rap, and people assume that you only make them one way and they're always bad, or they're always bitter, or they're always just whatever. The reality is that plants are actually kind of yummy, and there's also different ways you can prepare foods. And so we want to encourage people to eat more, but we're definitely not excluding anyone who eats dairy or eats chicken, because I eat chicken, I eat dairy, although I have a special place in my heart for plants, so I definitely try to stay more plant-based. But yeah, we are inclusive of everyone and everyone's diets.
Yeah, and just to really hit that home, because I think a lot of the time it was a barrier. Like, I even remember some of our first lessons with some of our youth groups. the kids were like, oh, but you're one of those vegan, like, and that was like a distance between us, right? Like they asked me if I was like a vegan TikToker or something. And I'm not, right? So, but do I love making spaghetti squash and topping it with like caramelized Brussels sprouts? Yes, right? And that's fantastic. And I think if I feed that to anybody, they would be totally happy without meat in that meal. And I think that's another big thing is as you're exploring it, just get creative with your veggies. Google is a super powerful tool. We're always happy to be a resource, but there is so much you can do with plants that I don't think people realize. Even plants that grow wildly, like foraging. I'm not going to encourage people who know nothing about plants to go forage for stuff, but that's like a whole field in itself. There's even things we don't know about this, but we're just trying to share what we do know because it can be a lot simpler than I think people perceive it to be. And there are always great sides to things, right? Like if you do a big barbecue, one of my favorite things on a big barbecue is a bean salad or a roasted red pepper dish. Or I'm trying to think of other things. The coleslaw we did the other day, the cabbage salad. So all these things are going to help you digest that meat too, which I think is big, is people don't realize that you need to pair proteins with other nutritional value, right? So in order to digest it better and to actually fuel your body in that same way and reap the benefits of those proteins.
I think from a student perspective, when we're doing this.
It's kind of hard to hear you on the stream.
Yeah. So just to echo it, just it's important to build that bridge and to build it openly and transparently and have those conversations with the youth and adults and anybody that you work with, because that then encourages discussion, right? And that's like discussion that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to have all the time. Like sometimes I feel so prior to WellFed, my first day in my first week in the US or in Tampa, people like my mom would bring me food and people would question like what was in that dish. Like they'd never seen things in it. And that forced me to start talking about it. And then I just kept having to talk about it because it was like I was never eating something that was normal to people, even though it was super normal to me. And then I realized like slowly how many things I'd been taught that weren't common knowledge. And I think when you come from a space where you did have those discussions at home, you think it's common knowledge. You think everybody knows that like olive oil is filled with healthy fats and, to stay away from like vegetable and canola oil because it doesn't have as much value in it. But that's not as common knowledge. If you've only ever seen your mom cook with a different, like the oil that they cook with, that's what you know, right? If your parents cook with butter, you cook with butter. If your parents cook with canola oil, you cook with canola oil. I just happen to be cooking with a good oil, right? It's not... So a lot of things aren't very commonplace, and just disseminating that information the best way we can.
Can you speak a little bit to, and you probably can't hear me, but if you can address it, can you speak a little bit to a Walmart? Like we're talking about this project.
Yes.
What's involved in that? What does that look like? How hard or easy is it to do?
Yeah. So hydroponic systems or aquaponic systems are essentially gardens that use pumps to funnel water and nutrients through the plant system, right? So when we talk about the AMRoC wall, which you can actually see behind me, and we talk about a hydroponic system, what that would literally look like is plants on this wall when you walked in the room. But there's more to that, right? There's science behind it. And the science really is as simple as a system that funnels that water from a basin through the plants in a continuous loop. So a closed loop system. And that closed loop system allows for a higher yield, even in a small environment. So you might think, okay, what would we possibly grow on this wall? We could grow a lot on this wall. We were talking about it today, and you could potentially put planters that were 8 feet long and 10 feet high. So it would essentially be 5 garden beds. And in each of those garden beds, you would have leafy greens, herbs, you could plant whatever you want. You can plant ornamentals. It doesn't even have to be food. You could plant ornamental flowers that make you feel good when you walk in a room and are more about an overall ambiance to the space that increases like mental well-being and just your overall energy when you're in the space versus worried about like harvesting it, right? And that's a big decision that people need to make is, are they prepared to commit to, because plants are like pets, I think is the best way I can put it, but you need to care for them, right? They do grow, and sometimes wildly, to the point where, you know, I can't keep up with my oregano bush or my mint, but sometimes they do require a little bit of love, like an orchid. My orchids just, they fight me, you know,
Thrive on neglect, so
which is a really good point, Orchids, you should forget about them and throw like an ice cube every once in a while. But I love plants. I'm always like out there touching it, and like then it just like a flower falls off and it's bad. But yeah, but the goal with the hydroponic system at the Fab Lab is really to incorporate the students in the construction and design and learning process that goes behind the maintenance of it all, because there's a lot of science built into it. There's the pH of the water that needs to be at a certain level, right? And if it's not, then you're not going to have the proper environment for the plants to thrive. You have filter systems that can be either done with a biofilter or your traditional filter. And I'm actually talking more to aquaponics right now, but you have your pump, right? Your pump it's a whole, I'm thinking of this movie I just watched, but it's its own system, right? There's piping, and it's really quite simplistic. Like you could go to a junkyard and build a hydroponic system as long as you had a pump. And so just to show all the science that goes behind it, right? You need to consistently rebalance the pH. And then if you're doing a traditional hydroponic system, you need to continue to feed it nutrients. Whereas if it's an aquaponic system, you have all the learning outcomes of how do those fish translate to nutrients, which is through their waste, and then being filtered out and then being pumped through to the plants. And then the plants actually pull those nutrients out of the water. And then essentially at the other end, you have fresh water ready to be pooped in again by fish, which is really quite interesting when you think about it. Yeah.
All of that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And there's also like IoT stuff that you can work into as well, right? So the technologies that you can actually put sensors in there, and the sensors are detecting the need for nutrients or water or light, things like that.
Yeah, and then light, another big component of it too, is how the proper light. What is a grow light? How does it differ from an LED? Like, these are all questions that I've asked and now know the answers to, but there's always going to continue to be more questions about it all, and an evolution to the whole system. Things like microgreens and indoor farming, it's all on the horizon, I think, when we think about how are we going to field this world that is just growing at an exponential rate. That's not what WellFed's trying to do, but it's focusing on just giving that introduction so that when you're learning about like things in the Fab Lab, you can relate that to food. And that's such an integral part of your person, keeping us alive, right? It's crazy how little we know about something that is the very reason we can breathe. And I mean, not oxygen, but you know what I mean? Like keep you going throughout the day. Rich, got anything to add or? Oh.
Nothing to add. I just think what the AMRoC Lab is doing is so cool. I love the idea of this wall and having kids work with it and design it, I think, is what you guys mentioned. So I feel like, so it'll be a really cool project, I feel like. Excited to see how it turns out.
Yeah, and then integrating cooking with it is just what we know best, but being able to harvest from it and incorporate, again, engaging all five senses into what comes off that wall and how they can use it. Even if it's a simple thing, like people, I think, underestimate herbs, but you can make teas that you don't even know about that will make you feel rejuvenated and awake from things that could grow on the wall behind me.
Yeah, and if we can make this into a demonstration space where we can bring teachers through it, others through the
Yeah.
we can do it. So you've done it here. And then help people reproduce it, because all the stuff we do here we want to be scalable, right? Reproducible. That'd be ideal. In my happy place, they come through and go, oh, I want this in all of our Hillsborough County schools.
That
would be a dream. Yeah, dream come true. And I love the idea of doing demonstrations too. I think this is really cool because, I mean, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on hydroponics or aquaponics, but I feel like, incorporating more of these systems and leaning in more towards this technology is helping, well, hopefully will help keep our environment healthier, and then turn around and keep us as people healthy too, because we'll be growing all these wonderful, amazing things. So I feel like health of the environment, health of the person is very closely tied. So really cool project, and excited to see how it turns out.
No, that's great. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Christian? Do you have any questions about it in terms of some of the stuff we're doing around here or at all? It's okay if you don't. I'm just asking and throwing you under the bus. Questions?
I just have to say in general, it's really exciting to see the community.
Hold on, I think, are you muted, Terry? I don't know if they can hear him.
Yeah, probably can.
There's-
He's gonna ask
Do you wanna come over here?
off your mic.
Oh, okay. Or come closer.
I just feel like it's great to see the community gelling, and it's great to see different people from the community bringing their talent and their knowledge in order to make this a better place and to really help. I think that the one common denominator is a real true spirit of caring and of trying to find ways to make things better.
Mhm.
So, I'm just happy to see, after a couple of years of being involved now, seeing things really come to fruition, seeing people really come to become leaders in different spaces with their different, passions. So
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think in health, at least, we have a lot of emphasis on interdisciplinary teams. So we have physicians, but then we also have scrub techs and nurses and ward clerks, and everyone kind of helps contribute to the care of our patients. And we're all important parts of the team. And so I feel like if we take that approach for every problem that the world has, having these interdisciplinary teams, having people with a health background, also engineers, also people who are from a sustainability background, an environmental background, I think that's really the key to solving a lot of the hard problems.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Did you have anything you wanted to add that we didn't get a chance to chat about, or that you'd like to add? Or?
I just wanted to say thank you for anybody who's listening or will listen to this recording in the future. But we love that we partnered with the Fab Lab because Terry has a contagious spirit, and the work that she does here is really quite incredible. So maybe contagious isn't the best word in the right now, but I welcome people to come check out this space, and especially when we do have this garden up, and to connect, because as Christian alluded to, there's so much we can do in community and just build healthier ones together.
Totally agree.
yeah.
And I'm going to pop in behind you to just
Yeah.
provide everybody, because they can't hear me from over there very well. But thank you all so much. Look, I popped in over here. It's like a magic trick. Thank you all for watching. We're really excited. This was a great evening. I'm really grateful to you, Dhalia, and Risha for joining us. And we lost Savannah, I guess, but really appreciate. We're really happy to be partnering with WellFed Community and looking forward to this. We'll be posting information about how students can participate in the summer program. And we'll have more details on that pretty soon. And hopefully, when folks come to visit AMRoC at the end of the summer, you'll be able to see a garden and some greenery in here. And we're really excited about that. So, that's it for our first Friday at the Fab Lab in June, and we'll be back in July with some new speakers. And thank you all for watching, and thank you to those who are going to watch. We'll catch up with you again soon.